Marvel's Avengers is Square Enix's and Crystal Dynamics' upcoming live service superhero game where you play some of the most iconic superheroes of all time to take down the evil megacorporation AIM, one brawl at a time. I've always loved the superhero genre of video games. The Batman Arkham series is one of my favorite series in all of gaming. Marvel's Spider-Man was one of the best games I've played in the last decade. So I was equal parts stoked and skeptical of this game. Stoked because despite a lot of early criticism, I thought the opening teaser looked really fun. Skeptical because it's a live service co-op looty punchy game and nothing makes my eyes glaze over faster than those four filthy stinking words. And having played through the closed beta this weekend between work, I can safely say that I was 100% right to be stoked and just as right to be skeptical. This game is a really fun superhero beat-em-up with a very entertaining series of single-player missions, conjoined with a really tepid live service model that takes that strong gameplay model and implants it on the same tired-ass missions you've seen in every goddamn live service looty shooting since the dawn of man. Not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but also not something terribly different from your Destinies, Anthems, and Ghost Recon Breakpoints. Fortunately, unlike those games, Avengers seems to have a very strong core single-player campaign to offset live service noises. And the end result was a beta that kept me hooked throughout my 10 or so hours spent playing it this weekend, but only ever truly pumped when playing the single-player bits. The single-player consisted of two key sequences. The first being the opening bridge and helicarrier sequence we all saw from the gameplay reveal, where you play as all of the main Avengers. The other being the infiltration of an AIM facility to retake the Quinjet, where you mainly play as the Hulk and Miss Marvel. And once the War Room opens up, that's when you get access to all of the live service missions, which you can play solo or with other players. There you have access to Iron Man, Black Widow, Miss Marvel, and Hulkster. Now, a big part of the appeal to this game on both ends of the spectrum is the superheroes themselves. So the question is, how do they play, and how distinct are they from one another? Well, on a functional level, all the heroes have the same controls. Light attacks, heavy attacks, combo attacks, dodge attacks, parries, aerial attacks, projectile attacks of varying abilities, two special moves in either a berserker mode or an everything dies button. Everything is mapped simply and effectively, and the more you level up and earn skill points, the more abilities you unlock to give each hero more and more variety in their combat. Now, it was mainly these four you got to play as for the beta, but the opening mission does give you a bit of a taste for Thor and Cap as well. And I can honestly say, these guys did a damn good job of not only making every single hero feel completely distinct from one another, but making each one a blast to play as. Thor plays like God of War 4's Kratos. You got this big-ass hammer you can smash and bash people around with, hurl at guys like a projectile and recall at will to wipe out anything in its path, and until you do, Thor's attacks become melee-focused. Cap plays a lot like your standard brawler, but with the added benefit of his shield being used for ricochet attacks a la MGS5's Ocelot. I'm genuinely stoked to see more of these two in action, what variety the projectiles will have, and the additional skills you can unlock for each one. But what little I got with them for the beta was entertaining and left me eager for more. Now, Miss Marvel, in truth, I didn't play as very much outside of single player, simply because I had to spend what little time I had leveling up the far more interesting characters. But what kept her distinct from Thor and Cap was the borderline slapstick nature of her combat. I was often leaping in the air and kicking fools left and right, or just stretchy punching them off ledges to their death. Navigating with her was pretty clunky since her grappling stretchy arm doesn't have a lot of fine tuning to it, but I didn't expect it would, given the sheer volume of distinct playable characters. Instead, I want to talk about the three main heroes I actually spent most of the beta with, one per night. First, there's Black Widow. She plays a bit like Marvel's Spider-Man, leaping around, grappling bad guys and latching herself onto them with her grapple hook and drop kicks, but she has the added benefit of a wide array of gadgets to keep her distinct. The first and most important are her guns. Starting off, you get a set of dual-wielding pistols so you can increase in clip size, focus, and fire rate. Fairly standard, but pretty unremarkable and pretty underpowered. It's when you trade those pistols in for dual SMGs and a goddamn hand cannon that Widow's range attacks become a blast. Her machine guns eat away at health pretty fast against the bad guys, and when you're out of range, you can swap that in for a Desert Eagle to blast chunks out of an enemy's health like a damn sniper rifle. And swapping between the two, going from blasting to punching away, is as seamless as it is joyous. There's a verticality to combat that you just don't get in games like the Arkham series. And it's very quick to show when playing as Widow. I was constantly jumping in the air and latching onto bad guys, drop-kicking them over and over and over. It was a blast. Or jumping on the vantage points to blast away with my Desert Eagle. Her trademark wrist gauntlets do their thing too, where you blast energy bolts at bad guys, but her invisibility and Mega Whip are where the real golden tickets lie. When invisible, enemies don't attack you, and shielded enemies will be completely vulnerable to your beatdowns. And because so much of the beta was co-op focused missions, anyone within your invisibility range gets cloaked too. And with your laser rope, Black Widow smashes and thrashes everything in her path. Honestly, I didn't know what the hell to expect from her going in, but I fell in love with playing her all throughout the beta. She has enough variety in her gadgets and vertical attacks to keep her from feeling too much like Cap or Miss Marvel, and I could very easily play an entire game with just Black Widow alone. Now when it came to Hulk, it took me a while to really get a handle on how to play as the big green ape, but once I did, good God was I a beast. Predictably, Hulk is just a giant brute, one you use to bash the ever-loving fuck out of everything that moves. You got the light and heavy hits, but hold square and Hulk will just straight up grab his enemy and use that motherfucker to start bashing other motherfuckers. You can even just throw them away like projectiles, which is never not hilarious. I was just smashing and bashing away as Hulk, often jumping in the air and landing down like a ton of bricks on anything I came across, over and over and over again. His projectiles, as far as I unlocked, consisted of ripping off debris from the ground or holding to grab larger chunks of debris, and like everything else, it all blends together quite seamlessly. He also has rage armor, where when you hold down the trigger button, you become invincible for as long as you have that green bar. It comes in handy during a tight jam and is equally quick to refill, which is good that his base attacks have all this variety because unlike Widow, his special moves are all pretty straightforward. Smash, which is basically a mega ground pound, the charge thing Bane always did in the Arkham games where you run and trample everything in your path, which frankly was a pretty unreliable attack. Half the times Hulk would just trample past whoever I was attacking and finish against the ground itself. The move should have let you actually direct Hulk as he charged, as opposed to just bum rushing whichever direction you happen to be facing at that time. And finally, there's a fuck off and die mega move wherein Hulk claps his hands and everything nearby gets powderized. Unless they're a higher level than you, more on that later. Navigating around as Hulk was pretty fun too. In contrast to Widow and Ms. Marvel, there's something rather cathartic about timing your jumps to leap faster and higher the more you pounce from A to B. I wish you had the option to actually climb shit the way you can in the Spider-Man game though, because once you hit a wall, you basically just freeze and either fall or jump off. Hulk took a bit of getting used to, but once I did, he was a blast to play through just like Widow. But neither he nor Black Widow could compare to what an absolute trip playing as Iron Man turned out to be. Iron Man is bar none the absolute most enjoyable hero to play as in this game, and I intend to milk his robo-tits for all they're worth once this game comes out. In contrast to everyone else, Iron Man can go from ground combat to flying around in the sky at the drop of a dime. You mainly just use melee combat with Iron Man to regenerate ammo for your energy beams, lasers, and rockets, all of which you can use within your combos once leveled up. Otherwise, you can jump and just fly around in the air mid-battle and start blasting away from a safer distance, or go flying away like a rocket when things get too hairy. And both of his special attacks, an EMP stun and his chest laser, can be fired off from the ground or in the air, aimed at your whim. Iron Man has the most versatility to his combat, and what makes it work is the fact that all of his attacks just naturally bleed into one another organically. I'm almost always in the air since that's what feels the most right playing as Iron Man, blasting fools with my rockets or drop-kicking them to build momentum. Everything feels smooth, finely tuned, and just creates a criminally fun combat model, letting you mix up your style however you see fit. Like the Hulk, starting off there's a bit of a learning curve when it comes to the air-based combat, and the dogfight mechanics he has are pretty loose and flimsy compared to the direct combat, but it has its use in giving the player some really kick-ass evasive maneuvers. On top of that, it makes control missions a lot more entertaining, having the option to just jet your way from point to point, and rocket blast any motherfuckers hanging back at the control points. He feels like the best of all worlds wrapped into a singular playable character, right down to the power fantasy of playing as the Hulk since his Berserker mode is the goddamn Hulkbuster. And for about 20 seconds you can just let loose, smashing and bashing everything in your path with higher powered energy beams, choke slams, and mega stomps. In contrast to the other heroes, it's Iron Man whose range attacks you really want to max out the most. And just like 2019's Control, using melee combat proves to be a fun way of refilling ammo, blasting and punching as you go. There's enough here within the heroes we got to make me stoked to see what all of these heroes can truly offer, and even more stoked to see just how many other heroes we've yet to see introduced into the fray. It's been a while since I've actively been excited to unlock and play as all these new characters, but this beta did a great job of whetting my beak and making me hungry for more, seeing just how distinct all the other heroes will ultimately end up being from one another. Of course, how you play is only half the battle. What is combat with the enemies themselves like? Well, based off the mission so far, there's a fair bit of variety in the enemy types. The vast majority of them consist of AIM soldiers with varying abilities and tons of robots. Now, full disclosure, fighting robots just isn't as exciting as fighting humans. It's kind of old hat at this point, but fair is fair. The enemy types do possess a shocking variety of abilities, weapons, and varying obstacles to be mindful of. There's enough variety within the enemy types that you do have to shake things up as things escalate. In fact, a good few enemies could be classified as mini-bosses, the way they stand far more resilient, take a bit longer to actually eliminate, and possess a far wider amount of attacks than your basic enemy. And if you aren't careful, these guys can kick your shit in with shocking ease, with each hero having their own advantages and weaknesses against these enemies to be mindful of. They get the job done, and fighting in this game is still a blast, but for such a colorful world full of iconic, equally colorful characters, bashing up robots most of the time just feels a tad milk-warm. Granted, Taskmaster has his own unique set of baddies as Helm, so who knows? Maybe the full game will have a wider variety of enemies to slap around with. Those are the basic enemies though. What about the main event, the boss fights themselves? Well, the beta featured 3 boss fights, 2 against renowned comic book villains, and 1 against a giant generic grindy drone that I didn't get a chance to fight and don't give a shit about. So let's keep the focus on Taskmaster and Abomination. Taskmaster's fight starts off pretty damn ho-hum. You got a whole lot of QTE bullshit when he's riding on his jetpack, and the first stage of his fight is pretty dull, since you're just evading his same one attack and shooting him repeatedly until the real boss fight begins. But once it does, it's awesome. Taskmaster has a fair variety of attacks under his belt, goes through varying stages, and you, the player, have a fair amount of options for how you fight him, right down to using his own explosive traps against him mid-battle. It's a free-reign battle that's short, sweet, and highly entertaining that sadly ends on an equally contextual note, when instead of letting you figure out how to beat him yourself, the game forces you to perform an instant win finisher. And I hate that shit in video games. I mean, it makes sense because this opening mission is supposed to be the tutorial, but I'd honestly rather that not extend to the boss fights themselves. So yeah, his Spider-Man fights are still infinitely better, but as a first boss, that large middle chunk of Taskmaster's boss fight is great. And I do sincerely hope he pops up more than once for a proper rematch. Then there's Abomination, who contrary to Taskmaster, isn't hampered by QTEs or contextual prompts. It's just a straightforward, varied boss battle against a giant hulking enemy where you have the full free reign to take him down however you wish as Hulk. These are my favorite kinds of bosses. Here's an enemy with a ton of attacks you've got to dodge, however you get it done, just get it done. It's intense, highly enjoyable, and truly does feel like a case of Hulk fighting his equal, right down to Abomination's special moves being taken beat for beat from the player. It's a really fun dance where the environment starts to really work against you, and as the fight goes on, Abomination really does start to give you a run for your money. No gimmicks, no strictly linear, this is the only way you can fight him tactics. For a game with varied combat, I always enjoy boss fights that make you flex all of that combat in one spectacular battle. And I'm incredibly pumped to see what other bosses lie in wait and what battling each of them will be like with the other heroes. I mean, the index in the beta shows 7 discovered bosses, one of which was Taskmaster, and I have to assume another being Abomination, while there's 7 undiscovered slots beneath them. So my hope is that means there are at least 14 different boss fights in this game against actual comic book villains, not against drones and not counting rematches. But on the subject of grind, let's talk about the thing holding this game back, which I brought up earlier: live service co-op. I know you've got tons and tons of pundits and articles already yammering on and on about this subject, but it is worth addressing. See, I noticed something after the single-player missions were finished, and I spent the rest of the beta doing these missions instead. At the end of each mission, the game constantly asked me to rate my experience, 0 being dog shit and 5 being amazing. With every single co-op mission, I had a good time, but never once did I click 5. It was mostly a solid 4, and the longer missions tend to be a 3. Because while each mission is carried by incredibly enjoyable combat, it's hampered by a dog shit gear system and a mission structure designed to be as boilerplate as humanly possible, to the point where every single fucking mission more or less bled into one another. I honest to God couldn't tell half the missions I played apart, whereas every single-player narrative mission I played was wholly distinct. And while I would have loved to have replayed some of them, the War Room missions were all I could jump back into. These missions aren't designed to be spectacular because they lack the structure of the solo play missions. They're designed to provide a base experience meant for you and your friends or AI buddies to smash around with, where the variety comes from the skills you unlock and the heroes you opt to play as, not the experience itself. But while each hero functions wholly unique from one another, that can only go so far if the missions you're playing all feel like the exact same mission over and over again. Because what are you working towards by that point? Leveling up your heroes by gaining access to a bunch of gear that turns your number slightly higher so enemies go down faster, but that's all in service of more chances to play even more missions that feel similar to the missions you've already played. You see, it's an endless cycle. These missions engage, but they don't stimulate. And they don't stimulate because they aren't meant to be stimulating. It's popcorn. You consume it again and again to keep grinding your levels higher and higher so missions become easier. And if you don't, the alternative is playing as a Hulk and getting punked by a 100-pound android. All this pointless gear shit does is put an unnecessary roadblock in between you and the fun. Nothing is ever made rewarding, satisfying, or fun if you have to increase a number again and again to make things feel even. The solo missions worked because you didn't have to worry about that shit. You just jumped in and enemies put up as much of the fight as they were supposed to put and went down as fast as they were supposed to without ever hampering the experience in the process. You need that grind because without it, what incentive is there to play co-op, right? Why play with buddies when you can just get the exact same result with AIs and not have some shitheel breathing heavily in your ear? Yes, I'm perfectly willing to admit that I hate co-op and multiplayer as a concept. And this shit is a textbook example of why. Because now in my head, all I'm thinking is how much of the solo player experience will have been compromised for the sake of creating an endless yet all too familiar gameplay loop designed to string you along for more and more fun yet ultimately samey missions. It's not even like this gear shit even lets you mix up the way your heroes look like Injustice 2. Your cosmetics are determined entirely through skins, some of which are cool and unique, most of which are just texture edits of the same skin with different colors. And of course you have to spend real money to buy some, I'm guessing some of the genuinely cool ones because fuck you. Unless you have a monstrous budget, everything is designed with a simple general model for 4 players to tackle. And as a result, far too many missions will lack the creativity and variety to keep things interesting the longer the game goes on. Either put all of your money into a really robust single-player experience with tons of boss fights, heroes, and unique missions, or put it all towards a co-op experience where 20 missions don't all feel like slight variations of the exact same mission. And whereas the campaign missions were all one and done, each mission here could be replayed over and over again. And it leaves me concerned that once you beat the actual game, all you'll have left is a war room and dozens upon dozens of homogenized missions, all entertaining and engaging enough, but never truly exciting. I mean, listen, if the campaign is really good, full of varied set pieces, boss battles, and gives you the ability to replay missions as you please, then this really won't be that big of a deal. But the thing is, Square Enix wouldn't put this much focus on the co-op and live service aspect of the game to the point where you probably won't be able to play offline if they didn't want to make it the focus. It's all old hat at this point. Capture place, eliminate guys, spend 30 minutes fighting giant thing, grind repeatedly until your numbers get higher and higher, and your reward, more grindy bullshit. Engaging and mostly fun to play, sure, but not something that leaves me giddy for more. What is the bread and butter of this game? The campaign or the war room? When the credits have rolled, will I be able to jump back in and replay the parts of the game I actually enjoy the most? Is there a post-campaign with actual unique single-player content to chew on? Or at least a new game plus or boss rush mode? Or is this hodgepodge of live service chaff all that'll be left? I just don't know, and the fact that I don't know the answer to that question is a problem. Because that answer will be the deciding factor of whether this game ends up being one of my favorites of this dreadful nightmare of a year or not. I am confident that this will be a very fun game. I'm just not certain how fun it will remain if this co-op shit is where the real meat lies. I want to hope that the full single-player experience is just as strong as the teaser we got, with plenty of boss fights, varied set pieces, and proper exploration. And there's enough good and great here that I am more than willing to give this game a shot. As far as the story goes, honestly I'm pretty ambivalent towards the whole thing. The premise is that the Avengers let their guard down during a big Avengers event, causing something to detonate, turning a whole bunch of people into non-mutants, including Kamala Harris here. After everything hits the fan, Captain America quote-unquote dies, Bruce Troy Baker Banner testifies against the Avengers, and they all get disbanded and outlawed. Kamala, aka Miss Marvel, acts more or less as the main character of the game, a young fangirl of the Avengers who was literally at the event for writing a fanfiction, and her role so far seems to be bringing her heroes back together, starting with Bruce, who kind of has a big brother thing going on with her. I mean, there really isn't much to say. It's all incredibly straightforward and kind of boilerplate if I'm honest. The setup is fine, but it all happens so fast that there isn't a single moment to really stop and process, so who gives a shit? Maybe it's rushed to avoid spoilers in the beta, and I do hope that's the case, but if you're teasing the story, this beta made me really excited for the gameplay aspect of the campaign, but did nothing to make me excited for the plot. Kamala feels like the kind of character I've seen a billion times over. She's a surrogate for the player bearing witness to her heroes in action, but she's also an Inhuman who has a token connection to other Inhumans, yet she also views herself as a monster, and the game is way too quick in juggling all of these different tones and character traits.
Now look at me. I'm a freak.
Whoa, you're not a...
Good job, Kamala. That wasn't awkward at all. But now I have my own room on the Chimera. Is this really happening?
Now, I'm sure there's a lot that the campaign actually covers in detail, which the beta probably glossed over to get to these points, but I honestly don't see myself being especially engaged by this story. And it's largely because the focus seems to be on the dry plot stuff and less on the character moments. And if you understand anything about superhero movies and games, we're not here for your stupid MacGuffin hunt or pseudo-conspiracies. It's the characters who should always take center stage, be full of life, color, and be the real draw to any comic book hero story. I don't know if that'll be the case here or not, or if I'll even like Kamala as a protagonist or just be bored by her, but we'll see. All in all, between my excitement and my skepticism, I'm mostly pretty damn pumped for this game. It gave me a taste of a really fun brawler with incredibly varied heroes to play as, going up against some colorful, entertaining boss villains, and herds of dipshits who I can't wait to plow into some more. Marvels Avengers hits our storefront September 4th. I want to hope this game is awesome, and that the live service aspects don't lessen it. This beta confirmed that the combat is kick-ass, the boss fights are still rock solid, the heroes have genuine variety and mechanical depth, and that there's some serious enemy variety to spare. But it's also hampered by a shit gear system and tired-ass boilerplate co-op missions. We'll see which side ultimately wins out in just under 2 weeks. Also, anyone else holding out for Howard the Duck being an unlockable character?